The Silent Awakening. The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 3,000 star systems like a cancer, its crystalline warships patrolling trade routes with the casual arrogance of gods. For 8 centuries, they had ruled without question, their advanced technology and ruthless efficiency crushing any species that dared resist. But there was one corner of the galaxy they barely noticed, a cluster of unremarkable systems on the outer rim where a peculiar bictal species called humans scraped out a living on forgotten worlds. Admiral Cathbar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching sensor readings with the bored expression of someone who had never faced a real challenge. His scaled hide shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated supreme confidence, and his 4 arms moved with practiced efficiency across the control surfaces. To him, humans were nothing more than resourceful vermin, clever enough to maintain basic space travel, but too primitive to pose any real threat. Another human cargo vessel, Admiral, reported his tactical officer, her voice carrying the same dismissive tone. Should we inspect it? Cathfar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Let the scavengers pass. They're probably carrying salvaged scrap metal and hoping to trade it for real technology. The Empire has more important concerns than babysitting primitives. But Cathfar was wrong. Dead wrong. Light years away, in a system the Empire had designated as unworthy of survey, Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the command center of humanity's most closely guarded secret. The facility was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, its surface carefully maintained to look like nothing more than another piece of space debris. Inside, however, the most brilliant minds humanity had ever produced worked around the clock on projects that would have shocked the galaxy's ruling species. Helena was a woman forged by necessity and hardship. Her dark eyes held the intensity of someone who had watched her people suffer under the Empire's casual cruelty, and her steady hands had never trembled, even when signing orders that would change the course of galactic history. She wore the simple gray uniform of the Human Liberation Fleet, but the respect in every person's eyes around her spoke of authority earned through sacrifice and vision. "Status report, Dr. Chen," she said, turning to the brilliant scientist who had made their impossible dream a reality. Dr. Marcus Chen pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose and smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just solved the universe's greatest puzzle. His laboratory was a maze of quantum computers, exotic matter containment units, and holographic displays showing mathematical equations that would have driven lesser minds to madness. But Chen had always been different, a prodigy who saw patterns where others saw chaos. "The Ghost Protocol is ready for deployment, Captain," he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "We've successfully created a quantum field that bends electromagnetic radiation around our ships, making them invisible to all known scanning technologies. But that's just the beginning. The real breakthrough is our new AI consciousness network." Elena nodded, understanding the implications immediately. The Zephyrian Empire's greatest weakness was their predictability. They had grown so accustomed to technological superiority that they had stopped innovating, stopped adapting. Their ships followed standard patrol patterns, their commanders made decisions based on centuries-old tactical manuals, and their sensors were designed to detect conventional threats. Humanity had spent decades studying every aspect of Zephyrian technology, carefully analyzing wreckage from their ships, intercepting their communications, and mapping their weaknesses. While the Empire saw humans as primitive scavengers, those same humans were actually conducting the most sophisticated intelligence operation in galactic history. "How many ships are ready?" Elena asked. 37 vessels, fully equipped with the Ghost Protocol and crewed by our best people," replied Commander Sarah Kim, the fleet's tactical coordinator. "Each ship is linked to the RTEMIS network, allowing them to coordinate attacks with precision no organic commander could match." RTEMIS was humanity's greatest achievement, an artificial intelligence network that could process information from thousands of sources simultaneously, predict enemy movements with startling accuracy, and coordinate complex battle strategies across multiple star systems. But unlike the rigid AI systems used by other species, RTMIS had been designed with human creativity and adaptability at its core. The command center's main display suddenly lit up with urgent data streams. Zara Okafor, humanity's most valuable spy, had transmitted intelligence from deep within Zephyrian space. She had spent years working her way into the Empire's administrative hierarchy, her natural intelligence and ability to blend in making her nearly invisible to their surveillance systems. Alina's jaw tightened as she read the report. The Empire was planning a cleansing operation against human settlements, starting with the colony of Haven's Rest. Over 50,000 civilians would be killed, their crime being nothing more than existing in space the Zephyrians wanted to claim for themselves. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," Alina said grimly. "Haven's Rest has less than 72 hours before the Imperial fleet arrives." Dr. Chen's face went pale. "My sister lives there. Her children." Alina placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We're not going to let that happen, Marcus. This is exactly why we've been preparing. The Empire thinks they're dealing with defenseless colonists, but they're about to discover what happens when you underestimate humanity." The plan they had developed was audacious beyond belief. Instead of trying to match the Empire's massive fleet ship for ship, humanity would strike with precision and surprise. Their ghost ships would appear from nowhere, cripple key targets, and vanish before the enemy could respond. It was a strategy that played to humanity's greatest strengths: creativity, adaptability, and the ability to think several steps ahead of their opponents. As the final preparations began, Alina walked through the corridors of their hidden base, watching her people work with quiet determination. These were the survivors of a dozen different worlds, united by a common purpose and an unshakable belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice. They had spent years living in the shadows, pretending to be weak while building strength, acting humble while planning revolution. The irony was not lost on her. The Zephyrian Empire had created their own worst enemy by dismissing humanity as insignificant. Every act of casual cruelty, every dismissive gesture, every moment of arrogant indifference had been carefully noted and remembered. Humanity had been forged in the fires of oppression, and now they were ready to show the galaxy what they had become. 3 hours later, the first human ghost ship materialized in the Haven's Rest system, its presence undetected by Imperial sensors. Captain Maria Santos, one of Alina's most trusted commanders, watched the approaching Zephyrian fleet with cold satisfaction. The enemy's formation was textbook perfect, exactly what their tactical manuals prescribed for dealing with primitive resistance. They had no idea they were flying into a trap 8 centuries in the making. "RTMIS, are you ready?" Maria asked quietly. The AI's response came immediately, its synthesized voice carrying an almost human sense of anticipation. "All systems are optimal, Captain. The enemy fleet consists of 47 vessels following standard intimidation protocols. They expect no resistance. They are incorrect." Maria smiled grimly. "Then let's show them what happens when humans get angry. All ships, initiate Ghost Protocol. It's time to announce our presence to the galaxy." Across the system, 36 more human vessels dropped their stealth fields simultaneously, appearing like specters materializing from the void. Each ship was smaller than the massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts, but they moved with an impossible grace, their hulls shimmering with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Kethvar, commanding the Imperial fleet from his flagship, stared at his displays in confusion. "What are those vessels? They're not in our identification database." His sensor officer's voice was tight with fear. "Sir, they're human ships, but the technology readings are impossible. Energy signatures I've never seen before. How did they get so close without being detected?" For the first time in his centuries-long career, Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. These weren't the primitive scavengers his intelligence reports had described. These were warships designed by minds that understood warfare on a level that terrified him. "Open communications," he ordered, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with uncertainty. "This is Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Identify yourselves and explain your presence in this system." The response came from Captain Santos, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who held all the cards. "Admiral, this is Captain Maria Santos of the Human Liberation Fleet. We're here to deliver a message your empire should have received long ago. Humanity is no longer hiding in the shadows. We are no longer afraid. And we are no longer going to tolerate your oppression." Before Kethvar could respond, the human ship struck with devastating precision. But instead of the explosive spectacle he expected, the attack was almost surgical in its execution. Electromagnetic pulses disabled Imperial weapon systems, targeted strikes crippled propulsion without destroying the ships, and sophisticated viruses began infiltrating Zephyrian computer networks. The Empire's mighty fleet, which had arrived to massacre defenseless colonists, found itself helpless within minutes. Ships that had terrorized 1,000 worlds now drifted powerless in space, their crews trapped inside vessels that no longer responded to their commands. "Impossible," Kethvar whispered, watching his displays go dark one by one. "How did they learn to do this?" Captain Santos' voice came through the static-filled communication channel, carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "We learned by watching you, Admiral. Every time you dismissed us as primitive, we were studying your technology. Every time you ignored our presence, we were planning your downfall. You taught us everything we needed to know about you, but you never bothered to learn anything about us." The Admiral's hands trembled as he reached for the emergency beacon that would summon reinforcements. But before he could activate it, his ship's systems came back online, not under his control, but under the command of the human AI network. "Your fleet will be returned to Zephyrian space with a message," Santos continued. "Tell your leaders that humanity is no longer content to live in the margins of the galaxy. We have technologies you cannot comprehend, strategies you cannot predict, and a determination you cannot break. The age of Zephyrian dominance is ending. The age of human ascendancy has begun." As the disabled Imperial fleet limped away from Haven's Rest, carrying word of their humiliating defeat back to the heart of the Empire, Elena Rodriguez stood in her command center, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. This was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, human ghost ships were emerging from hiding, striking at Imperial installations, freeing enslaved populations, and demonstrating that the balance of power had shifted forever. The Zephyrian Empire had laughed at humanity for centuries, dismissing them as insignificant primitives. But now, as reports of impossible defeats began flooding in from across their territory, they would learn the most important lesson in galactic history. Never underestimate the species that refuses to give up, refuses to surrender, and refuses to accept that their dreams are impossible. The war for galactic freedom had begun, and humanity had just fired the first shot. The reckoning storm. The news of Admiral Kethvar's defeat spread through the Zephyrian Empire like wildfire, igniting panic in halls of power that had known only victory for 8 centuries. In the crystalline spires of the Imperial capital world, Zephyr Prime, emergency sessions convened as military leaders tried to comprehend how their supposedly invincible fleet had been neutralized by a species they had considered barely worth noticing. High Archon Velthera, supreme ruler of the Empire, stood before a massive holographic display showing the latest intelligence reports. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered with patterns of rage and disbelief as she processed the impossible data. Around her, the Empire's greatest military minds struggled to explain how everything they thought they knew about warfare had become obsolete in a single day. 47 vessels, she hissed, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. 47 of our finest warships, disabled by a handful of human scavengers. How is this possible? General Krickstall, the Empire's chief military strategist, shifted uncomfortably. His species had conquered a dozen star systems through careful analysis and overwhelming force, But the humans had shattered every tactical assumption he had ever made. High Archon, our preliminary analysis suggests the humans have developed technology that operates on principles we don't fully understand. Their ships appear to manipulate space-time itself, and their AI systems demonstrate processing capabilities that exceed our most advanced computers. 800 years, Velthera growled. For 800 years, these creatures have hidden in the shadows of our empire, watching, learning, preparing, and we never noticed because we were too arrogant to consider them a threat. But the Empire's troubles were only beginning. Across the galaxy, human ghost ships had begun a coordinated campaign that demonstrated planning and precision beyond anything the Zephyrians had encountered. Unlike the Empire's standard tactics of overwhelming force and terror, the humans struck with surgical precision, targeting specific weaknesses and achieving maximum effect with minimal resources. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the war room of humanity's primary command vessel, the Defiant Dawn, watching real-time reports flow in from dozens of simultaneous operations. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering, larger than their ghost ships, but still invisible to Imperial sensors, serving as a mobile command center that could coordinate actions across multiple star systems. "Report from Sector 7, announced Commander Kim, her voice tight with excitement. Captain Jackson's team successfully liberated the Altarian mining colonies. 3,000 beings freed, Imperial supply lines disrupted, and 0 casualties on our side." Elena nodded grimly. The Altarians were one of several species the Empire had enslaved, their homeworld stripped of resources, while their people toiled in brutal conditions. But unlike the Zephyrians, who saw other species as tools to be used and discarded, humans had spent years building relationships with oppressed populations across the galaxy. "What about the intelligence networks?" Elena asked. "Zera's people have identified 17 key Imperial installations with critical vulnerabilities," replied Dr. Chen, who had transitioned from pure research to tactical analysis. "Our AI projections suggest we can cripple their communication grid within 72 hours if we coordinate the strikes properly." The strategy was uniquely human. Instead of trying to match the Empire's massive fleets in direct combat, they were systematically dismantling the infrastructure that held the Zephyrian civilization together. Communication relays, supply depots, administrative centers, and orbital defense platforms were all being targeted simultaneously, creating cascading failures that amplified the impact of each strike. But the most remarkable aspect of the human campaign wasn't their technology. It was their approach to conquest. Every world they liberated was offered genuine freedom, not simply a change of masters. Species that had been enslaved for generations found themselves welcomed as equals in a growing coalition of free peoples. On the liberated world of Kepler's Garden, a former Zephyrian agricultural colony, Captain Santos met with representatives from 6 different species that had joined the human cause. The meeting took place in what had once been the Imperial Governor's Palace, its oppressive architecture now decorated with symbols of hope and freedom. "The humans fight differently than anyone we've ever encountered," said Thyssera, a reptilian diplomat whose people had endured 3 centuries of Zephyrian occupation. "They could have claimed our world as their own, but instead they asked what we wanted. They offered us technology, protection, and partnership, not submission." Santos smiled, understanding the profound impact of that simple concept. Humanity learned long ago that true strength comes from unity built on respect, not fear. We're not trying to replace the Empire with another empire. We're trying to build something better, a galaxy where every species has the right to determine its own destiny. The news of human victories and liberated worlds began to spread faster than Imperial forces could contain it. Species that had never dared to resist the Empire's rule suddenly saw hope where there had been only despair. Rebellions erupted on dozens of worlds, coordinated and supplied by human agents who had spent years preparing for this moment. Back on Zephyr Prime, High Archon Velthera faced a crisis that threatened the very foundation of her civilization. The Empire's communication networks were failing, Supply lines were being systematically destroyed, and reports of uprisings arrived daily from sectors that had been considered completely pacified. "How many ships can we muster for a counterattack?" she demanded. General Kriegstahl's patterns flickered with uncertainty. "Our main battle fleet still numbers over 3,000 vessels, High Archon. But the humans are not engaging in conventional warfare. Their ships appear from nowhere, strike critical targets, and vanish before we can respond. Our standard tactics are useless against an enemy we cannot predict or locate." The desperation in the Imperial command structure was palpable. For centuries, they had relied on the same strategies that had built their empire: overwhelming technological superiority, ruthless efficiency, and the absolute certainty that resistance was futile. But humanity had found ways to neutralize each of these advantages while exploiting weaknesses the Zephyrians had never known they possessed. The turning point came when Zara Okafor transmitted intelligence about the Empire's most closely guarded secret: the location of the core world's defense network, a massive array of automated weapons platforms that protected the heart of Zephyrian space. The network was considered impregnable, its AI systems designed to destroy any unauthorized vessel within light years of the capital. But Dr. Chen had spent months studying captured Zephyrian AI systems, and he had discovered something remarkable. Despite their advanced technology, Imperial artificial intelligence was rigidly programmed, following predetermined patterns that could be predicted and exploited by a more flexible system. "RTMIS can infiltrate their network," he explained to Elena during an emergency planning session. "Their AI follows logical parameters, but it can't adapt to truly creative solutions. We can use their own defenses against them." The final assault on Zephyr Prime began with what appeared to be a desperate human assault: a fleet of visible ships approaching the core worlds through conventional space lanes. The Imperial Defense Network responded exactly as programmed, launching massive automated battle platforms to intercept the primitive human vessels. But the visible ships were decoys, their purpose to trigger the defensive response and mask the approach of the real assault force. While the Empire's AI systems focused on the obvious threat, human ghost ships slipped through gaps in the defense grid, carrying teams of specialists directly to the heart of Zephyrian power. Elena herself led the primary infiltration team, materializing aboard the Empire's central command station with the precision of a surgical strike. The facility was a marvel of crystalline architecture and advanced technology, but its defenders had never faced an enemy that could appear inside their most secure installations. The battle for control of the core world's defense network lasted less than 6 hours. Human specialists, guided by RTMIS and equipped with technology the Zephyrians couldn't comprehend, systematically took control of the Empire's own weapons. Automated battle platforms that had protected Zephyr Prime for millennia suddenly turned their guns on Imperial installations, while communication systems began broadcasting messages of liberation to every corner of the galaxy. High Archon Velthera found herself trapped in her own palace, watching in disbelief as her empire crumbled around her. When Elena Rodriguez finally stood before her in the Imperial throne room, the defeated ruler expected the same ruthless treatment the Empire had always shown its enemies. Instead, Elena offered something unprecedented in galactic history: mercy. "Your civilization doesn't have to end," Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. "The Zephyrian Empire is finished, but the Zephyrian people can have a future. Join the coalition we're building. Help us create a galaxy where every species has the right to exist and thrive." Velthera's bioluminescent patterns flickered with confusion. "You could destroy us completely. Why offer mercy to those who would have shown you none?" Elena's smile was sad but determined. "Because that's what makes us different. Humanity didn't fight this war for revenge. We fought it for freedom. Your people were as much prisoners of the Empire's cruelty as anyone else. Now you have a chance to choose a different path." In the months that followed, the galaxy began to transform in ways that would have been unimaginable under Imperial rule. The coalition of free worlds grew rapidly as species after species chose cooperation over conquest. Trade networks were rebuilt based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Scientific knowledge was shared freely, leading to technological advances that benefited everyone. The humans, who had begun their revolution as dismissed primitives, found themselves reluctant leaders of a new galactic civilization. But they had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to lift them up. Captain Elena Rodriguez, now Admiral of the Free Galaxy Coalition, stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest achievement, a massive space station where representatives from hundreds of worlds worked together to build a better future. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships from dozens of different species, their crews working side by side on projects that would have been impossible under the old order. Dr. Chen approached, carrying a data pad with the latest reports from the frontier worlds. "The Zephyrians are adapting better than we expected," he said. "Their biotechnology expertise is proving invaluable for terraforming operations, and their organizational skills are helping establish new trade routes." Elena nodded, satisfied but not surprised. Every species has something valuable to contribute when they're free to choose their own path. The Empire wasted the potential of an entire galaxy because they were too arrogant to see it. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some Imperial loyalists continued to resist, and certain sectors still struggled with the transition from authoritarian rule to democratic cooperation. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had hope. Hope that intelligence and creativity could triumph over brute force, that cooperation could achieve more than conquest, and that even the smallest species could change the course of history if they refused to give up. The Galactic Empire had laughed at humanity, dismissing them as insignificant primitives confined to the galaxy's forgotten corners. But in their arrogance, they had created their own greatest enemy, a species that had learned to fight not just with weapons, but with ideas, creativity, and an unshakable belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And at its heart stood humanity, no longer hiding in the shadows, but leading the galaxy toward a future brighter than anyone had dared to imagine.